Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to last day of RSA. I hope you're enjoying sitting down, giving your feet a rest. My name is Leora Herman, and I am the co-founder of AppSec Village. Over in the corner over there, we're a nonprofit focused on application security awareness, education, and building community. I have the unique pleasure of introducing today Ben Schmerler, who is going to give us the first toilet talk. So you guys are part of the first audience to enjoy a night or an afternoon of toilet talk with Ben Schmerler. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Thanks everybody for attending, really appreciate it. I hope we have a very mature conversation today, very serious stuff. I don't want to hear any jokes, any laughs at all. We're talking serious business. Anyway, now I'm going to talk about why we hack toilets. My name, before we start, here's the little disclaimer. Make sure that you don't hack your own toilet or your neighbor's toilet or anyone else's toilet. That would be bad. We shouldn't do that. We've got our disclaimer in. All right, great. So who am I? My name's Ben. I work for a company called Independent Security Evaluators. We're a cybersecurity consultancy based out of Baltimore, Maryland, but we have people who work all around the world. We focus on white box application security assessments, network pen tests, design consulting, things like that. But the way I put it is, if you have a product or a service or a network and you want to find out what's the real vulnerability, and you want to get it done by real ethical hackers using real ethical hacking techniques and not just a scanner, we're the people who can help you. What do? I talk to clients about how to approach testing in the right way. It's always different. Every approach to testing should be unique based on the assets we're trying to protect and the thing we're looking at. I talk about scoping, cadence, depth, and also I like to talk to people about how they talk about security. I find that often people talk about security in a very negative light, fear-based, we better do this or else. And yes, of course we should make things secure so that we're not afraid of bad stuff happening. But there's also a positive way to talk about security, which is to say, you can say that we care so much about security that we're willing to put ourselves out there. So I really advocate for that as well. At ISC, we like to do some weird stuff. Was anyone here at the Sandbox last year in 2023? Any hands? Cool. So last year at the Sandbox, we brought a toilet seat that we hacked. And we created this little guy. I call him Tim the Toilet. We even gave him eyes and a little cigar that's popping out of his mouth. The way these things usually work at our operation is that somebody like me makes a sarcastic comment and says, hey, we should hack a toilet. And then someone else says, that's a great idea, we should run with it. And then we inevitably do it. But yeah, we brought it here last year, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what went into it. We got a lot of reactions and responses. Obviously, this is meant to be a little bit provocative. I want people to see it and have some questions. The most obvious question when people would come up to us at a conference like RSA is, why is there a toilet here? And this brings me great joy because it gives me an opportunity to bring out my sarcastic side and say, well, RSA is a long conference and Cyber Cafe is going, and after you have a few coffees, you just kind of need to take a break a little bit. Or I was telling people, this is actually an old historic landmark. The toilet was actually here first, but when they were building the Moscone Center, they really had to incorporate this historic landmark into it. People did ask if the toilet actually works, and I laughed at them at first, like, oh, no, of course not. Of course it doesn't work. But after a little while, maybe I kind of wished it did a little bit. Is this a troll? And is this what people mean by immature targets? I'd like to think that the target isn't so immature. It's more that the targeters are immature. So that's some of the responses we had from it. So more importantly, what did we actually do, and what was the actual goal of this? So there were a few devices we brought. It wasn't just the toilet seat. We reverse engineered several devices that communicated on wireless spectrums, both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And we reverse engineered these devices using a black box format to create our own applications to issue them commands. So in the case of the toilet seat, we were able to make the toilet seat heat up on demand. We were able to make light patterns and things like that. And we basically just compromised the device entirely. Similarly, we did something like this with a robotic vacuum, where people could make the vacuum pick up M&Ms that we scattered around the carpet and stuff like that, as well as some Bluetooth light bulbs that had different colors and things like that, getting them to do various things. Part of the purpose of this is multifaceted. These demonstrations are meant for everyone. Not everybody who comes to RSA is maybe highly technical. We want to demonstrate what can actually be done with these devices. And to be perfectly direct, many of the things that we did here didn't take us a long time to develop. Maybe developing the apps took a long time, but creating the exploits were not that complicated. So part of the point of this is that if these devices exist in the world and we were able to, in a couple hours, come up with ways to send it instructions, there must be a way to do this with other stuff. And I think the big question I want to sort of talk about today and discuss with you guys is, what are the broader implications in a world where millions or maybe billions of IoT devices exist and are growing? I don't have the exact statistic, but if you look at the proliferation of IoT devices in networks, it's a parabolic growth. I mean, these things are growing exponentially. We all use IoT devices. They exist everywhere. But I would really encourage you to sort of think outside the toilet a little bit when you're thinking about this stuff. It's not just about a toilet seat. We hacked the toilet seat because it was a fun thing to do and it got people talking, but there are much broader implications. I think it's pretty obvious, as I mentioned before, that these devices are everywhere. To me, the definition of IoT is take something that is not digital, that has any kind of function in the world. It could be your refrigerator, it could be your parking meter, it could be your Fitbit, it could be the jacket you're wearing or your headphones or whatever, and add some kind of communication or digital connectivity to this, and now it's an IoT device. And these things exist all across the spectrum. We're all familiar with an Amazon Echo or a Nest thermostat or a Ring camera or any of these things. But these things exist in ways that a lot of people don't see or maybe don't think about. So you can see I showed some examples here of like a plumbing instrument that looks for leaks, a heart monitor, something we actually did do a hack on in the past that you could read about on our website, even like solar panels and things like that. And so while these devices will vary in terms of their intended function, right? An Amazon Echo is a very basic device. It plays music, you can order stuff through it, whatever. And the heart monitor has obviously a much more clinical point. A lot of the things that make these things IoT devices are actually quite similar. They're all using things like Wi-Fi. They're all using things like Bluetooth. And so what does it mean when we can, on a toilet seat, use the same Bluetooth connection to manipulate the toilet seat that we would with, say, a plumbing sensor? Doing the demonstration on the toilet seat only means we can do this with other things. It's also important to note that if we were able to find these vulnerabilities on the toilet seat, that vulnerabilities just exist. One of the big problems when people talk about security is that they say, well, we've secured our product. And maybe that's true in the broad sense, but nothing is ever 100% secure. Think about everybody who came into this building today came in and they were inspected by the guards, they walked through the metal detectors, they went through your stuff. But I don't think anyone's so naive to believe that there isn't a way to compromise the security of this building, right? Security is just a state of being, and nothing is 100% secure. So we should recognize that these vulnerabilities exist across the spectrum, whether it's a consumer device or maybe an infrastructure device or a healthcare device or anything like that. And so how do we deal with these challenges? And do we even understand what it means when these devices are connected? You look at the box, and the box says it does this, it communicates on this spectrum, all of this other stuff. But what is the device actually doing? Is it getting updated? What kind of data does it send outward to the manufacturer? Does it collect data of other things on your network for maybe legitimate or non-legitimate purposes? I don't want to terrify anybody about this, but we need to understand what these things ultimately mean. There's also the broader concept. I mean, I imagine people are generally familiar with the term shadow IT, right? Devices that exist in a network that people don't know about. I think you first started hearing this maybe as people started adopting bring their own smartphones to work and iPads and tablets and stuff. But now this is extending to other devices in the workplace or in offices, wearables, even things that aren't connected to the network. Consider the idea that if you have a smart watch and that watch has a camera on it or a listening device and it's not connected to the network, it still has security implications. We just need to be mindful of this stuff because now everything is talking and everything is exposed. There's also IoT devices that could be rogue access points and rogue cell phone signals. Just because it looks like something doesn't mean it does the function that it's purported to do. And so we need to keep in mind that these shadow IoT devices have significant implications in our lives. The challenges of securing an IoT environment are numerous. So the first concept I want to talk about is trust. When you go out and you purchase an IoT device or you join it to your network or any number of things, you really should be asking yourselves a number of questions about the people that made it. So first, who made the device, right? If I go to the Apple Store and I buy an Apple Watch, there's a relative level of trust there, right? Apple, as evidenced by the updates and patches that they put out there, has some care for the security of their devices. They find a flaw, they issue a patch, it gets fixed, and you have a generally supported product. But will the smartwatch that you buy from a brand that you've never heard of, that you found randomly on Amazon at a discount, do you have the same trust in that manufacturer to be able to take care of that device in the same way? And what does that mean about your use of the device and how it connects to your other things? How often are they testing these devices? How are they actually making sure that these devices are secure by the time they got to market? You know, we have a tendency to see something very flashy and very useful for us, and we want to use it and we want to get the utility out of it, but we don't necessarily think about what was done on that device before. It's a black box that we're just sort of trusting. We should really question that. Have they done any documentation to prove this diligence? A lot of times you buy a product or you see a product on the shelves and it says, this is the most secure device. But all that is a box. It doesn't mean anything. It talks about what encryption levels they're doing, but they're not talking about their testing methodologies. They're not talking about any certifications they get. And they're not necessarily publicizing those things on their website or in their documentation. And how do they store the data that comes back from these devices? So if I have a device that is collecting important data, is that device just being used for me? Or is that data being farmed off to some company that's going to use it or maybe sell it or do any number of other things? We need to understand these things, and device manufacturers should be publicizing this information. Otherwise, we should actually question how we use them. When it comes to integration, when you join a device to the network, what's it doing on the rest of the network? Is it opening up access to your internal traffic to the outside? You know, is this thing just speaking to other things within a local area, or is it actually sending information off? Does it collect any general network traffic? There are devices that are taking more information than they need just because they can. Everybody wants to have your data whether they need it or not. And will it create problems just because of the amount of traffic it generates? We should really scrutinize devices before we deploy it. And I'm going to get more into that later when we talk about the apply stuff. When it comes to maintenance, what do we need to know about maintaining these devices? When we join the Nest thermostat to our home network, surely over the lifespan of that device, that is going to have some kind of security patch that needs to be applied to it. And when we install it in grandma's house to give her a nice new thermostat, what does she need to know about this so that when she is joining it to her network, she's not creating some potential security flaw? What are some things we can do to make sure this device is properly patched and maintained? Chances are, a lot of these devices, by the time you even unbox them and put them on the shelf and set them up, they probably already have a firmware update. I mean, we've all gone home and purchased something, and as soon as we turn it on, it looks for an update and installs something. This is commonplace. So we need to be mindful that maintenance applies not only to PCs and servers and iPads and stuff like that, but also these IoT devices. And then also, what about the end of life of these devices? These manufacturers, when they build them, they don't intend to put these devices out for infinite use. They're not going to support them 5 years from now. They're going to move on to the next thing. And once a vulnerability exists, because remember, vulnerabilities always exist, these vulnerabilities are not going to be taken care of by the manufacturer. We need to be mindful of this because that 10-year-old IoT device that's no longer getting supported may present a critical weakness to something we actually care about. There's also the idea of inherent flaws. So even if we do everything the right way, these vulnerabilities will still exist. The most secured products in the world can be broken if you put in enough time and effort and know-how. The goal of any kind of security practice should be to make things very difficult to break. Not impossible, but very difficult. The analogy I like to give a lot is personal health. So if you work out every day and you eat healthy and you get a good night's sleep and you do other sort of healthy behaviors, there's a very good chance you're going to live a long, healthy life. But it doesn't guarantee anything. And there are no guarantees with this stuff. So we just need to keep this in mind, and we need to plan around those inherent flaws. Okay, I do all the things to keep myself healthy, but I still get a checkup with my doctor. And if I need to take medical intervention to make myself healthier, I do it. Just because I put in a fire system in my home, or a fire suppression system in my home to put out a fire, doesn't mean my house can't catch on fire. So I get homeowners insurance to make sure that my home is protected and I have some coverage for my liability. Last, there's the concept of evolving standards, and there's really a couple ways to look at this. First is, sometimes when these vulnerabilities exist, they've always existed, and it just takes someone to really discover them. A few years ago, we had the famous Log4j vulnerability, which was a major vulnerability that impacted lots of things. And when people like ISC were assessing these products for vulnerabilities before Log4j, it wasn't like we were looking for Log4j vulnerabilities. We didn't know about it. And then once that vulnerability was publicly disclosed, now we had to look at how we assessed every product in a different way because we have new information about these vulnerabilities. The other piece is those evolving standards will change the way we look at vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities will have a different impact based on the device that's actually using it. So let's talk about the point of hacking a toilet. So the real point of doing this is to look people straight in the eye and tell them that you need a spotlight on your toilet. It brings me great joy to go up to someone and seriously tell them, hey, could you just adjust this light and make the light swirl a little bit, just like the water going down a toilet? It brings me great joy to ask for that. Maybe you want to fill the gaps at RSA when things are a little slow and you want to name your toilet and keep your brain moving. It is quite fun when I have a family dinner. I went to my niece's birthday party a couple weeks ago, and they asked, Ben, are you doing any travel soon? I said, yeah, I'm going to San Francisco. Oh, what are you doing there? I'm going to talk about hacking toilets. And your aunt looks at you like, what did my nephew do with his life? And then finally, it's really important that when you're at your desk and you decide to Photoshop a Taco Bell logo, that you can giggle and have a good time and get some joy out of your work. But the real reasons to hack a toilet, jokes aside, is first to show it can be done. You know, like it or not, there's a lot of people who have skepticism about the importance of whether these things can occur or whether they're meaningful or not. They are meaningful and it can happen, and people need to be aware of it. While this is a basic demonstration, you know, I'm talking about a toilet seat now. The principles that we use to reverse engineer a toilet seat can be applied to the heart monitor. And so if I can manipulate the toilet seat into heating up, does that mean that we can manipulate the heart monitor to register false readings about whether a heartbeat's going? And the answer is yes. This is something that we were able to discover in a previous assessment years ago. It's really important also to learn and create awareness about these things in the world, right? It's not, you know, there's, someone came up to me yesterday and they were talking about IoT devices and they were saying like, this is why I don't do IoT, because anything can be broken. But imagine if we had that attitude about the internet. You know, in the mid-90s, I remember people were starting to get in the internet, and the idea of putting in your credit card number to buy a book on Amazon was very intimidating for people. I don't know if I want to do that. I'm not sure I can really I really want to take that risk. What I'd really much rather do is take my credit card and put it into a machine and then put a carbon thing on it and then swipe it a bunch and write down the numbers in a million places. I mean, that's not secure either. But if we create an awareness about what the actual risks are and what can be done about it to make these things manageable, we can get the benefits of technology without exposing ourselves to unnecessary risk. I also think it's really important everywhere, and it's not just applying to IoT devices, that we create what I would call a culture of security. And what does that really mean? It means that we incorporate security into the decisions we make on a day-to-day basis. So when we're about to join a device to our network, we think about what is this device, what does it do for us, how does it benefit to us, and what are the risks? And if we actually are mindful about these things, much like we would theoretically be mindful about the food we eat or the air we breathe and things like that, we're likely to have a much better outcome. So think about that every time you're doing something. What impact does it have on my security, and what can I do to make my culture of security a little bit better? And finally, we should provide confidence and dispel fears. So risks exist. Everything has a risk. Let's just understand these risks, let's accept the risks, and come up with a plan to manage these risks instead of burying our heads in the sand or being Luddites and not accepting technology at all because of this irrational fear. But the only way we can really do that is by educating people and giving them the opportunity to understand these things for themselves on a broader scale. So how do we apply this? And I broke this up into 3 different slides based on what your role might be. And maybe you have multiple of these roles for yourself, or maybe some of it applies, some of it doesn't. Well, if you're a consumer and you just have a home network and you just are purchasing these things, make sure you have some kind of inventory. Know what's in your home. Know what you're hooking up. Know what kind of maintenance it needs. Understand that these devices are evolving. While the hardware is fixed, and the hardware is not really going to change when you purchase an IoT device, generally speaking, the firmware that it's running, all of the software behind it, these things will change over time, generally speaking. You should research products before buying them. So before you go out and say, wow, this is a great wireless microphone and it only costs $20 on Amazon, well, maybe you should read up a little about this product and make sure it is what you think it is. Ask yourself what kind of data these things receive and how it can communicate. And I have a typo there. What I meant is threat model your IoT devices. Now, for people who are in penetration testing, they're probably familiar with threat modeling. But if you're not, the concept of threat modeling is saying, I have assets that I want to secure, and I'm going to take the 10,000-foot view of understanding exactly what I have out there. So what are the assets I want to protect? What are the things that are in place to protect them? What do I have to do to maintain that protection? Who are the threat actors who are liable to potentially attack me? And just take a general overview so that we know the landscape in which we're working in. If you're unfamiliar with threat modeling and you want to do something like this for yourself, come talk to me after the talk, and I have an exercise I could share with you after the show that just sort of breaks it down in a very logical and basic way for even the new person. Really important, too, to harden the rest of your devices and networks. So when you have IoT devices on your network, they could have flaws. How do you manage these flaws? By making sure that the other things you use are also secured. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that the Nest thermostat has some new flaw that's found, but your other devices on your network are relatively secured, and someone somehow gains a point of entry into your network through that Nest thermostat. Well, if the rest of your network's relatively secured, maybe the impact of that vulnerability isn't so bad. Even if the vulnerability itself, a critical vulnerability that lets someone root into this Nest device, is significant. Security is a broad thing, and we have to look at it from a broad level. Nothing is perfect, but if we create that layered security, we're going to have a much better outcome. And finally, just try and stay on top of the news. When Log4j came out, it was a big deal. It was reported from many media publications, and obviously not every vulnerability is going to get that kind of exposure, but a lot of the big ones are. And when those big ones come out, make sure that you are well aware of what's happening and have a path to address them. There's other things to keep in mind, too. So the FCC is about to have they're finalizing the Cyber Trust Mark program. I think these things are going to help the average consumer as it moves forward. If you're an integrator or an IT guy, somebody who is responsible for maintaining these devices introducing these devices into networks, focus on your security first and then your deployment. So again, there's this rush that a lot of people have where it's, let's get the device in, let's get it running. I really want to make this thing work. But really, it should be, what impact does this have on my security? What do I need to do to make sure that this device is implemented in a proper way? And then I'm going to deploy it. Layer security onto your network too. So just because your firewall has a security feature, don't assume that that feature is going to work perfectly. Take the steps to put other things on your network to make sure that you've got some backups, that you've got a safety net to protect yourself. If you're an IT person and you're dealing with a lot of end users who may be a little bit antsy, who want to get their things going, it's really important from a communication perspective to make sure that when people are adding devices to the network, that you're sort of an ally to them and that you're making things easy and manageable. Sometimes IT people can be a little dismissive. They get a little annoyed with end users who want things. But it's a lot better to say to somebody, hey, you want to integrate this device into our network. It's something I can do for you. I have to do X, Y, and Z before I do that, and I should have a response for you by Thursday or whatever the thing is. If you provide that level of transparency and clarity to people about your intent and what you're going to do, you'll generally get much better user buy-in for those sorts of things. And we do this because we want to avoid this shadow IT situation where people are joining things to networks because they don't want to get along with IT. Really, IT should be an ally to the end user, and there should be a dialogue back and forth. They shouldn't be opposed to one another. It's also important to have adequate monitoring and asset management. Several people during the event have come up to me and asked me about or talked to me about the challenges they're having, even identifying all the IoT devices on their network. They may not appear traditional to certain network scans and things like that. You need to have some kind of broader visibility. It's very easy to see a Windows PC on a network or a server or something like that, or a network switch. Much harder for especially bleeding edge IoT devices for those things to be easily identified. And finally, consider isolating the device. If it's something that's really risky, you know, Sven in his previous talk was talking about these MRI machines running with old computers connected to them. The strategy to deal with this extreme risk of a machine, an MRI machine using a Windows 7 PC, is to isolate this on the network, to do something so it can't maybe connect to other stuff. I see a gentleman laughing in the audience. I came from a world before I did this where I was in managed IT services, and it was astonishing how expensive these clinical devices are using inherently insecure technology. We have to work around that, unfortunately. If the device isn't good, we can't get rid of the MRI machine. It just doesn't work that way. Finally, if you're a developer, let's say you're building these products or these applications, there's things that you need to do to make this good for your end user. First, you need to put security into design and not after building, including threat modeling. A lot of times I hear from startup companies, people developing products, they talk about, we have to get to market, we have to get to market, we have to go for our next funding, we have to do this, we have to do this. That's great and all, and I 100% am sympathetic to the business side of these concerns, but there is no business if the product is completely compromised. If nobody has faith in your brand, or if there's a major data breach, you don't have anything. It doesn't matter whether you got to market or not. Security built in design will also make the price of implementing security much, much less. It's really hard to secure, it's much harder to secure things after the fact than during design. We advocate for doing design consulting as you're building a product. And then when that product's ready to go, then test it, do a pen test on it like you would do with anything else. Really important to regularly assess your products and don't take the results for granted. Sometimes people want to check the box off, right? They say, well, we did the assessment, it's done, we found these things, everything's cool, see you later. You know, look, you're not going to test these products every day, all day, but you should have a cadence to it. You should say to yourself, this product, in order to deal with the changes to the product, the updates to the product, how we've continued to add features or updates or whatever it is, we need to make sure that these things are still secure, that as the security landscape changes and the vulnerability landscape changes, that we've now assessed to keep those things in mind. Make it a part of your software development lifecycle. really important also to seek out independent analysis and not just trust your internal teams. Internal teams are great. Internal teams should be testing these things, and we should try to get them to find those vulnerabilities. But even better than that is going to a third party, someone who has no bias in the situation, who is just there to find vulnerabilities, and ask them to take a look. We all have blind spots. People have different perspectives. When we have analysts work on assessments, we often reassign them to different projects and we rotate them around because we want different perspectives when doing security assessments. You should seek out that kind of independent analysis to check your work. People make mistakes. That's why you have to work with third parties. It's really important to document. And finally, utilize the approved standards that are out there. A lot of times when people are developing things, especially on the web application side, they're using third-party libraries, other things, and sometimes they use things that aren't properly vetted. If you're adding something into your product and you don't know what it does, you're creating a gigantic risk, and it's one that you can't control because you didn't build that part of the product. I have one more lesson. If you really need to learn about application security more, you can scan this QR code right here. I'll leave it up for a minute or two. And we will ship you a free copy of Hackable, which is a book written by our executive partner, Ted Harrington. It talks about a lot of philosophies about some of the things I talked about today. So how to secure applications and networks properly. And it also gets into other things like dealing with maybe the internal politics of making sure that you get the resources you need to do the testing that you need to do, to how to think about what kind of resources you should put into something based on the value of the asset behind it. So check it out, and I'm happy to talk with you more about it. And with all that said, any questions? I'm happy to answer anything. You can clap for me, sure. Thank you. But please, any questions, happy to answer them, if I can. Whoever, just you can go up to the mic, I guess.
So,
Hi.
as an end user,
Yes.
okay, if I buy an IoT device, how do I even know? I guess, are there any tools or resources available for me to do some sort of verification to say at least that the IoT device does not have any malware loaded, right? Or
Yeah.
to get onto your network and steal your data,
Yeah.
right?
You're always going to be dealing with incomplete information. And I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges here is trust, right? So when you're looking at it, I mean, first, what's the brand name? As I said, I don't think you have to think too hard about buying an Apple IoT device or something by Microsoft. These are responsible companies who, they make mistakes, they have vulnerabilities, yes, but Microsoft and Apple and some of these other manufacturers are going to fix those things when they're discovered. So that's the first thing. If you're not really sure, I would go to the company's website. And these companies really should publicize stuff about what they do for security. They're not going to tell you every vulnerability they've ever discovered on their website. But I don't think it's really a problem for most of these companies to be able to say, this is the general approach we have to security. These are the principles we operate on. And they should be able to demonstrate some kind of diligence there. Make sure let's say you go through that, you feel like you're pretty comfortable with the device, and then you get it at home. Make sure when you buy it that you look at the documentation, that you understand how the maintenance procedures go. Maybe you look at some user reviews to see what kind of maintenance is out there, or what kind of things you have to deal with. It just takes a little bit of diligence, and I don't want it to sound like you have to go, go through hell and high water to do this stuff. It's some basic stuff. It's just not being blind about it and just jumping right in. You should just take a little bit of patience. I hope that answers your question. Sure. Yes.
I guess I'd echo one of the things that you said, which is don't put IoT devices on your, if you have a corporate, if any of you are responsible for your corporate network, don't put IoT devices on the corporate network, right?
Yeah.
That's how Target got hacked, 12 years ago?
The HVAC.
Yeah, HVAC vendor.
Yeah.
So it's really bad practice. So second thing is, as a home user, I have every bit of confidence that IoT vendors will never solve the security problem themselves. What would you recommend as I know they're not going to fix it, but I have my own home network. So would you say, hey, segment all those onto their own thing, and then something at kind of the gateway level?
I think I'm a little less pessimistic than that in the sense that the right vendors will maintain this stuff. As I said, like, you don't have to worry with trusted vendors as much. But I think what you talked about with segmentation is a really good idea. And also just consider, the actions you're going to take to secure these devices or reconfigure your network are really going to be different. A vulnerability to an IoT device means a lot different to a home in a rural environment as opposed to a corporate network. Let's say a device has a Bluetooth low energy vulnerability, right? But your house is in the middle of nowhere. And the only way to communicate over Bluetooth is basically a short distance. Well, you know what? I'm not too worried about that vulnerability because no one's ever going to take advantage of it. But in an office environment, they might. That vulnerability might mean a lot different because of the context. So I would keep that in mind too before taking any actions. And this is where threat modeling comes in. What could actually happen if this vulnerability was taken advantage of? And if the answer is nothing, well, then I wouldn't even worry about it too much. But if the answer is they could steal my tax returns or run my credit card or something like that, those are much more impactful. Or, in the case of medical devices, cause health concerns. Now we're talking about life and death stuff here.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things I wanted to mention is I appreciate you talking about medical devices because I work in that segment. What about devices that have legacy software? How do you manage those? Because they're almost unpatchable, and if it's a medical device, right, you have probably 20, 30,000 of them out there in medical device families. So that's the challenge I face is legacy software.
So this is about basically it's like what can you control and what can't you control? It's like what's the phrase? Like accept the things I can control and be at peace or something. I'm bad with those expressions, but you can't control, especially in the medical device field where these are maybe 6-7 figure devices, and the company, I remember I worked with a medical practice one time and they had an imaging machine, and the imaging machine was using an Windows XP machine, and the manufacturer wanted like 200 grand to upgrade the PC that it was talking to, and they're like, we're a medical practice, we can't spend just $200,000 to get rid of this issue. There are things that they could do to mitigate it, though. So the other gentleman mentioned network segmentation. That's a good start. Network monitoring and traffic monitoring, things like EDR systems or SIMs, those types of things. If you're in the context of medical devices, and medical practices apply. If you're dealing with sensitive information, well, if we're monitoring the traffic on the network and looking for unusual behavior, at least we'll know if someone's trying to exploit this stuff so that we can take quick intervention and mitigate the issue. We might not be able to solve the problem, the core issue, but we can put things around this that make the impact of that vulnerability way less severe. Also, this is why pen tests exist. When you're doing a pen test, and it sounds like you definitely should based on what you're talking about, you should say, this is what we have on our network. These are the things that are maybe a little more typical, and the pen tester will probably shrug at it. And then say, but we also have these weird things, and be transparent about it. Because a good pen tester is going to see what they can exploit based on a result, based on that. And then based on the results, you can take the corrective actions that are most appropriate. So sometimes it's okay to have a vulnerability if you know how you're going to deal with it after the fact. So that's kind of how I would approach it. Any other questions? All right, cool. Well, thanks very much, everybody. My contact information's here. You can find me on LinkedIn. You got my email, bschmerler@isc.io. I'm over at the IoT Village space over in the corner there. Happy to talk to anybody. I'm here for a couple more hours. And again, thanks so much.